Hello, and welcome back to Write America, a literary series spearheaded by author Roger Rosenblatt in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. My name is Bridget, and I'll be filling in for Lauren tonight. For those of you not familiar with us, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore. I'm so excited to be back here with you all for another night of Write America, this time featuring writers Daniel Halpern and Natalie Diaz. If you missed last week's episode with Julie Sheehan and Claudia Acevedo Quiones, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Book Review's Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can always go back and watch the episode again. Before we get started with the readings, there's a few things that I'd like to show you about Crowdcast that you'll need to know for tonight's event. We have the buy button down below where you can purchase signed copies of participating writers' works. We also have the ask a question button where you can ask questions that will be answered later on in the episode. And on the right, we have the chat feature where you can speak amongst yourselves. Our first reader tonight is Natalie Diaz. Natalie is Mojave and an enrolled member of the Gila Indian tribe. She is the author of 2 books of poetry, When My Brother Was an Aztec and Post-Colonial Love Poem. Natalie is a MacArthur Fellow, a Lannan Literary Fellow, a United States Artist Ford Fellow, and a Native Arts Council Foundation Artist Fellow. She is director of the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands and is the Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Chair in Modern and Contemporary Poetry at Arizona State University. Please welcome Natalie Diaz.
Hi.
Hi, Natalie.
Hello. Gracias for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, Iwanja Hotan. And gracias also to Roger for having the generosity and imagination to pull us all together. Bridget, of course, and Lauren for the continued work. And it's really lucky to be here alongside and with Daniel. So I'm in admiration of the work on and off the page and on other people's pages that Daniel has done. I'm going to read a few poems from Post-Colonial Love Poem. And I'll start with one since I'm joining you all from my reservation. So Hamakav Makava Matinch. And so this is in thinking toward the lands that Long Island is on top of. Manhattan is a Lenape word. It is December and we must be brave. The ambulance's rows of light blooming against the window. Its single siren cry, help me. A silk red shadow unbolting like water through the orchard of her thigh. Her come in the green night, a lion. I sleep her bees with my mouth of smoke, dip honey with my hands stung sweet on the darksome hive. Out of the eater I eat, meaning she is mine, colony. The things I know aren't easy. I'm the only Native American on the 8th floor of this hotel or any looking out any window of a turn of a century building in Manhattan. Manhattan is a Lenape word. Even a watch must be wound. How can a century or a heart turn if nobody asks, where have all the natives gone? If you are where you are, then where are those who are not here? Not here. Which is why in this city I have many lovers. All my loves are reparations loves. What is loneliness if not unimaginable light and measured in lumens? An electric bill which must be paid, a taxi cab floating across 3 lanes with its lamplit gold in wanting. At 2 a.m., everyone in New York City is empty and asking for someone. Again, the siren, same wide note. Help me, meaning I have a gift and it is my body made 2-handed of gods and bronze. She says, you make me feel like lightning. I say, I don't ever want to make you feel that white. It's too late. I can't stop seeing her bones. I'm counting the carpals, metacarpals of her hand inside me. One bone, the lunate bone, is named for its crescent outline, lunatus, luna. Some nights she rises like that in me, like trouble, a slow, luminous flux. The street lamp beckons the lonely coyote wandering West 29th Street by offering its long wrist of light. The coyote answers by lifting its head and crying stars. Somewhere far from New York City, an American drone finds, then loves a body. The radiant nectar it seeks through great darkness, makes a candle hour of it, and burns gently along it like American touch, an unbearable heat. The siren song returns in me. I sing it across her throat. Am I what I love? Is this the glittering world I've been begging for? And I talk a lot about desire. I think it's something that a lot of natives have been disallowed from talking about desire, pleasure. And of course, like all of you, like any person in this country, I also am always in the midst of, or in proximity to, or consumed by, or consuming anxiety. So this poem is thinking toward that. From the desire field. I don't call it sleep anymore. I'll risk losing something new instead, like you lost your rosen moon, shook it loose. But sometimes when I get my horns in a thing, a wonder, a grief, or a line of her, it is a sticky and ruined fruit to unfasten from, despite my trembling. Let me call my anxiety desire, then. Let me call it a garden. Maybe this is what Lorca meant when he said, verde que te quiero verde, because when the shade of night comes, I am a field of it, of any worry ready to flower in my chest. My mind in the dark is una bestia, unfocused, hot, and if not yoked to exhaustion beneath the hip and plow of my lover, then I am another night wandering the desire field, bewildered in its low green glow, belling the meadow between midnight and morning. Insomnia is like spring that way, surprising and many-petaled, the kick and leap of gold grasshoppers at my brow. I am struck in the witched hours of want. I want her green life, her inside me in a green hour I can't stop. Green vein in her throat, green wing in my mouth, green thorn in my eye. I want her like a river goes, bending, green, moving. Fast as that, this is how it happens. Soy una sonambula. And even though you said today you felt better, and it is so late in this poem, is it okay to be clear, to say, I don't feel good? To ask you to tell me a story about the sweet grass you planted, and tell it again or again until I can smell its sweet smoke, leave this thrashed field and be smooth. And then I'm going to end on this last poem. This is a new poem. I've been thinking a lot about the word migration. And as you've heard, there's a lot of coyotes and the idea of colony. So this is kind of tilting toward like a flash fiction, also something I've been writing a bit of. Colony. The coyotes are on the beach, vacuuming tonight's terrible light with their eyes. They puncture the river sleep with holes of blue-green eyeshine. The river rolls over, awake. The coyotes are baptizing the rabbits, dunking them in the shallow water. The rabbits play dead in the coyotes' mouths, but jolt and cry out when they break the water. The river is cold, and they shake the rabbits. I've never seen a rabbit swim, and no rabbits will swim tonight. The river, because it is the scene of their crimes. The river, because it will clean us of what the rabbits have done. The rabbits are not from here. They come from another territory of night, from a different moon. The rabbits are white, which is not a color, but how fast it twitches. The rabbits disappear our women. Maybe not these rabbits yet, but rabbits like these, and soon. White rabbits is call and response, a multiplication, the game where everyone holds hands. Then someone squeezes, sends a signal, and everyone sends the same signal they receive. If that game were forever and played by rabbits. Rabbits so white their eyes are pink. The rabbits took my cousin. They collapsed her down to a greasy spot somewhere. Like when your brother backs the truck out of the driveway and the truck leaves behind an iridescent liqueur on the ground. So you sprinkle sand over it to absorb the stain. The coyotes are a night shift, a labor of shades against the pebbled shore. They are a range of blue-black mountains reorganizing weight, a dusk. With more night happening, the rabbits become stranger. Their ears are slicked back like men. I try not to ask myself, what is a rabbit? I can't explain the rabbit, but I feel it. I've felt it my entire life, that there's something wrong with this world. I don't know what it is, but it's there, a white blot in my mind. The question distracts me, and a rabbit kicks its body free. The noisy shadow tangles and disrupts the coyote's feet. One of the coyotes transforms. It opens all of its mouths and recaptures the rabbit. At first, the cry of a rabbit is the cry of a baby. Then the cry becomes something there are no words for. The cry of a rabbit will make you cry, unless you are hungry, or the rabbit has pulled your cousin out of your life by her hair. The coyotes plunge the rabbits into the river 4 times. One of the rabbit's ears flap in the wind like empty violet shirt sleeves. Each time they are sunk in the water, the rabbits become more quiet. The silence embers the coyote's eyes copper, chrysocolla. Some of the rabbits hang upside down, staring off and soothed by the moon, who is also soaked with river and whose light trickles out from the middle of the water to the shore in tremors. Wounds move this same drenched way. The mesquite trees along the jetty are tap-rooted in the water. When you gash a mesquite trunk or cut its branches, its skin seeps red gold sap, weeps and crusts an amber blister. The rabbits wish to begin healing, but their wounds are happening now. The rabbits wish to cicatrix. Rabbits are always too late. The rabbit's cries have become choked with water or the coyote's teeth, most likely with blood and fur, a burbling. The river and its bullfrogs are also sounds. A fish leaps from the water and falls back into it. I should have said the rabbits were screaming, not crying. I am the one crying. On nights like this, everything is wet as tears. The coyotes move in a group, how mourners move around a pyre, how authorities move to the door of a family whose daughter or mother has gone missing. Not a tight pack, but a breathing. How fingers brush one another on their own hand. The coyotes' tails are down. The rabbits aren't saying anything anymore. They were another kind of quiet before this, before the screaming. The rabbits have never wanted to talk about what they have done. This rabbit quiet is a new quiet. Tufts of pale fur rock in a foam onto the shore, then off, back to, and off again. It never settles. The coyotes clean the rabbits with the river and clean us of the rabbits. They lick the terrible light from one another's faces and eyes. But what the rabbits have done is still done. The coyotes know this and cry the spilling moonlight back to the moon. The moon crusts and closes. The coyotes leave the beach one at a time. We are all clean and lonely. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Natalie. We will see you in a couple of minutes. All right. Up next, we have a reading from Daniel Halpern. Daniel is the author of 9 collections of poetry and 2 books on food. For 25 years, he edited the international literary magazine Antaeus, which he founded with Paul Bowles. He has received numerous grants and awards, including fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the NEA, as well as the first Editor's Award given by Poets and Writers and the 2015 Maxwell Perkins Award. In 1978, with James Michener, he founded the National Poetry Series, which oversees the publication of 5 books of poetry every year. Halpern is the founder of the publishing house Echo. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Roger, Bridget, Lauren, and thank you for that great reading, Natalie. Your poetry is so incantatory and muscular and gentle, all at the same time. And I love that new poem, the rabbit poem. I hope I can read it on the page. So I'm going to read 2 poems, one sweet, one less sweet. The first is for my daughter, Lily, who took a long time to bring into this world, but we finally got her. She's now 27. She wants to be a public defender. God bless her. I said to her, if you could figure out a way to make less money than a poet, you will figure it out. And she has done that. God bless her. So this is a poem that I wrote when she was very young. It's called Her Body. The fingers. They are small enough to find and care for a tiny stone, to lift with wobbly concentration from the ground, from the family of stones up past the pursed mouth. For this we are thankful, to a place level with her eyes, to take a close look, a look into the nature of stone. Like everything, it is for the first time, first stone, chilly cube of ice, soft rise of warm flesh, hard surface of table leg, first and lasting scent of grass rubbed between the tiny pincer fingers. And there is the smallest finger poking the air, pointing toward the first heat of the single sun, pointing toward the friendly angels who sent her, letting them know contact's made. The eyes. We believe their color makes some kind of difference. The cast of it played off the color of hair and face. But it makes no difference, blue or brown, hazel, green or gray, pale sky or sand. When sleep burdened, they'll turn up into her, close back down upon her sizable will. But when she's ready for the yet to come, oh, they widen, grow a deep, cool sheen to catch the available light and shine with the intensity of the newly arrived. If they find you, they'll hold on relentlessly, without guile, the gaze no less than interrogatory, fixed, immediate, bringing to bear what there's been to date. Call her name, and perhaps they'll turn to you. Or they might be engaged, looking deeply into the nature of other things, the affect of wall, the texture of rug, into something very small that's fallen to the floor and needs to be isolated and controlled. Maybe an afternoon reflection, an insect moving slowly, maybe just looking with loyalty into the eyes of another. The toes. Who went to market? Who stayed home? This one goes, this one doesn't. This one eats the flesh of grass-eating mammals. This one does not. In the 17th century, Basho, delicate master of the vagaries of who went where, wrote to one of to one he loved, not of market and not of meat, but something brief, abbreviated, like 5 unburdened toes, fluttering like Celia in the joy of a drafty room. You go, I stay, 2 autumns. The signature. Who knows how they get here, beyond the obvious? Who packed the code that provided the slate of her eyes? And what about the workmanship that went into the fingers, allowing each intricate movement just months from the other side? Who placed with such exactness the minute nails on each of the 10 unpainted toes? And what remains beyond eye and ear, the thing most deeply rooted in her body, the thing that endlessly blossoms but doesn't age, in time shows greater vitality. The thing unlike the body that so quickly reaches its highest moment only to begin with little hesitation, the long roll back, slowing all the way until movement is administered by devices other than those devised by divine design. The ageless thing without a name, like air, both resident and owner of the body's estate. But this thing, only partially unpacked, sings through the slate that guards it, contacts those of us waiting here with a splay of its soft, scrutinizing fingers. Her spirit is a sapling thing, something green, still damp, but resolute, entering this world with an angel's thumbprint pressed to her unformed body at the very last. A template affixed to her body when they decided it was time to let her go, for her to come to us, and their good work was done. An angel's thumbprint, a signature. And this poem takes place in Morocco. It's about a friend I had who worked in a bar, a shady bar, difficult bar, during the end of the 60s, who I got to know fairly well. And he was later hospitalized, and I went to visit him. And this is a piece about that experience, the experience of knowing him. It's called The Bar Escargot, a Story. Mo served drinks in the Bar Escargot, a youthful Liberian saved by Peter, the English owner, from a cannibalistic sect of the Masons. I would find my way there after tapas at the Spanish bars above the port, after the European paseo along the Rue de Passeur. The escargot was dark, empowered with a scent of West Africa, vague felony, and some piece of Beethoven from Peter's complete works on the tape deck any hour of the day. When I arrived, Mo was often beating a dust mouse behind one of the couches of the room. And when he saw me, he set down the broom, straightened a piece of colonial furniture from the previous century, put on his white waiter's coat, and served me a beer called Stork, the national bird of Morocco. Then he brought out the chessboard, and he and I would sit down to play before the other customers arrived from their solitary dinners. Mo didn't talk much beyond his speaking vocabulary of 20 or 30 words, but understood everything in English, French, German, and Moghrebi. It never took him longer than 5 minutes to complete a game of chess against me, although I had won tournaments in the parks of Los Angeles. Mo had a huge Alsatian called Parrot, trained by Peter to attack the natives. The rest of us moved without harm, casually through the bar, talking to Mo and Peter without tension. As the night wore on, the regulars began to appear at their appointed hours. They were all solitaries, cast out from one place to another, their histories referred to or grand fictions of the present. They were mostly beyond 70, living in rented rooms off the boulevard, wearing loud clothes, the males in reverse makeup, the females blurring facial lines with unsteady hands. They met at the escargot each night and ran through their trumped-up agendas over strange mixed drinks Peter knew, as he knew each of them, their names, the hour of their arrival, the hour they would take their leave. Among this clientele, Mo moved like a sullen predator, laughing suddenly at nothing and continuing on, preying on empty glasses, and Parrot, kicked from one sleeping spot to another, kept an eye on the door, an eye on the ever-moving Mo. One evening around Christmas, Mo was taken to Benny Mikata, the local house of mental detention, the state hospital, after he was caught chasing one of the regulars up the Rue de Fez with a Peter's meat cleaver in his hand. A few months later, he returned, but the currents that had run through him like medication had turned him into something different. He was no longer engaged by the dust that roamed the floors of the escargot, and he lost now at chess, which I think broke what was left of his heart. After that, he and Parrot stayed in the kitchen, and Peter cleared the tables as he served his drinks to the regulars, who diminished as the new year started out, deserting the bar escargot for the ranch bar, its upbeat chili and country western music. That summer, Peter died of a blood disease, and the bar escargot was turned over to the king. No one knew where Mo and Parrot were. They disappeared after Peter's death, although it was rumored he had returned to Liberia aboard some freighter he caught in one of the southern ports. After I returned to the States, I heard from a friend that a spree of killings had taken place in the Dradeb, an outlying residential district, and Mo had been discovered in the area and returned to Benny Mikata for life. The bar escargot, Peter, Mo, and Parrot weren't anything the long-time residents of Tangier would remember or wish to remember. A low-class bar that might have served a Greyhound station had it been in Des Moines. But I began to wonder about Mo in Benny Mikata, and years later went to find him. It took weeks in green and yellow offices to get a visitor's pass. I arrived one morning in late spring when the entire compound was enclosed in fog, and the sounds that emerged from the indistinct structure were not something you wanted to take away with you. I was led through a series of gates and courtyards, keys and locks, and sullen guards who had been there too long. In one of the inner courtyards, a low whitewashed door opened, and a middle-aged Mo sprung out on all fours. The light blinded him, as if it had been his first in 10 years. And he remained stationary, confused by his sudden release and the strange voices filling the courtyard. And then he lifted one hand to his eyes and tried to bring me back from some dark corner of his life. From the dirt of the courtyard, he looked up at me. His head was shaved, and he wore the remains of something that looked like long underwear. He looked up at me and laughed the laugh I remembered for the bar escargot. I remembered the scent of Africa rising on the clinking glasses, the ever-attentive Parrot, and the last disturbing string quartets Peter had committed to tape. And then he grabbed my leg. Before the guards could move, he opened his mouth as if to bite me, but instead called out into the textured air of the damp courtyard, "Parrot, parrot." And then the guards had him, applying to his hard body their guard sticks, pulling his hands behind his back and pushing his forehead into the dirt of the thickening courtyard. When they dragged him back to his cell, whatever lay behind that low doorway, I saw women emerge from a room in the back of the building with small foil-covered trays, which they pushed into the openings cut at the base of the doorways. They placed the trays halfway through, so the hinged door rested on whatever food was being offered. I suppose they wanted to know who was eating without having to open the door onto whatever was alive in there. When I left, it seemed that as the locked gates clicked open for me, the trays in unison were pulled through the shuttered openings into the waiting darkness. Thank you.
Gracias. Gracias mil. It's beautiful.
Are we on our own now?
I think so. I think it's just you and I.
You guys are good to go whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah. Gracias for that beautiful, beautiful reading. I started like quoting a lot as I was on the chat, and then I decided just to sit and listen a bit. So decided to how I could be a bit more attentive.
Well, thank you for your reading. Since we haven't met, this is a nice introduction.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much in the poem for your daughter, for Lily. I was just thinking, I'm still struck, especially I think a lot about green and all of the different sensualities of green, which people think we don't have sensualities of green in the desert, but I think they're actually heightened because we're in the desert. But just thinking of the little pincher fingers, like very first, like I can't remember, of course, mine, but I know it must have been something unbelievable, right? An overwhelm, being able to not only like smell it, whatever that scent was, but also to know that I could pull it. Must have been something. Maybe that's one of the places poetry begins.
Nicely put. Well, we were emailing last night a bit. We were talking about language, and I started thinking about it, and then it kept me up all night because I had a thought that I couldn't resolve. So I figured I would just put it on the table for you to help me out, so I could have a good night's sleep tonight.
Sounds good.
What language means, what it means at this particular moment, what it means having survived a year of the pandemic. Some of us alone. Some of us with other people. Certainly nobody is going to be the same after this year in whatever ways they're not the same. But being alone, which I was for most of the time, although I was lucky to spend time at a certain point with friends, the notion of language and how it works, what kept me awake was when you have a thought to yourself, you're alone, and you think something, are you doing that in language or is it a different format? That it's not like music where you hear it. It's not like art where you see it. There's a visual component. It's not like cooking where you have an olfactory, non-linguistic. I mean, the language for olfaction is very minor, and mostly it's pejorative. But just thinking an idea, a thought, what form does that take? So I know you're going to have the answer, Natalie.
Yeah, no, I feel like this is, I think maybe we were both up thinking the same things. I think a lot about this, like, of course, in different iterations or different shapes. But, I think something I wonder a lot about is, I try very hard, and I actually think it's an impossibility because of the human-centric being that I am. I don't know that I can be anything other than that. I can try hard to, but I think a lot about the energy. And again, I'm being drawn back to this, your first poem, and that you were finding a language or a lexicon, at least, for some of those experiences, what they might have been. But I wonder if, I think language is late to what's happening, you know, like because language is attached to meaning, I think the energy is happening. I wonder a lot, like I'm thinking of the hand and handwriting, right? Now you've got me thinking about the hand, especially because of the poem for Lily. But like that as we're writing poems, you know, especially if we're writing in hand, by hand, I feel like my hand actually knows more and it knows it faster. And then I catch up in words or language, like the mark, you know, however, like you're signing your name, Daniel, the D, you go to make the first mark, the D is not done, but in some ways your hand is already knows what's coming next. So I think I wonder how late we are to language. And so I'm wondering about this pandemic time, if maybe it has shifted time just enough that we might meet language in an other space, you know, like where does your poetry happen? Does it happen ahead of you? Like, even if we're thinking backward, our memory is there. The language itself, I'm always wondering, I guess, where is the imagination and where is the language happening or taking place? And I don't, you know, of course I have no answer, just another spin, I guess, of the merry-go-round to keep us moving.
Well, you know, yeah, writing your signature, you know you're going to start it, and you know the D starts, but your hand knows the rest of it. So in a similar way, to go back to my conundrum, which is like if you're having a conversation now you're with someone and they're talking like we're doing now, and there's certain phrases where I actually form the language in my mind before I ask you, which I didn't just do now, which is probably clear from my inability to be articulate about this. But sometimes you form a thought in language and you put it out there. But what about the times where you're having a dialogue and you don't have time to formulate the language for it? You just respond. Where does that come from and what does it look like? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it does happen a bit like tennis, right? Like it's simply, I mean, I guess I'm wondering how much of what I say is actually your energy, you know? So like right now you're like spinning it. It's almost, you know, like you're making this, I don't know. I suddenly went Rumpelstiltskin, like we're spinning this and then I kind of spool it back to you. You know, I think that's what's so beautiful about conversation, but also about poetry is that it is so reciprocal. Even if like right now, of course, we're on the same like energy level, at least in a satellite or in our ears or something. But even when we write a poem on the page and send it out, I think that's like, and this is why I think language is, it's another way that we try to touch, you know, story, right? It's like, and touch being like, I'm trying to reach you somehow, or maybe even I'm trying to hold myself, or maybe I'm trying to carry my ancestors, still like, you know, or a memory. It's still touch. But that's something that I always wonder about is how much of what I'm ever saying in a conversation is not even my own energy. It, you know, and I think that's what's beautiful about it is like the unknown of what happens when two bodies of energy meet in a space. And that's maybe like, I mean, I wonder too about like being alone in pandemic, like you were saying, like what is language in this space of being alone? And like, so where does sound happen then even, you know, what does one say moving about their own space in a day to themselves or out loud? Or how does, if the body's making a noise, is that another way of language, you know?
There's certain things that you do say out loud, like when you hit your leg on a chair, shit. That's clear, but it's a mystery. The idea, and I hadn't thought. You'd think that after 70 years, you'd think about it, but how is it possible that if you think about how you communicate with yourself, what form does that take? And I don't have an answer to that. That amazes me. I mean, you said, well, like, what do you, when you write and what is your practice? I guess it's a survival of emotion in some ways is what you want in whatever form it takes. I mean, one of the things that you're able to do in your poetry is you can be very hard. You can be that I said incantatory, but there's a genuine openness and sweetness and emotionality to your work, no matter whether you're talking about that poem, The Bullet, really got to me. Repetition and the kind of ricocheting of that metaphor all the way through that poem. Like it's a devastating poem because of all of the political ramifications of it. But the weirdness about language is there another format that is available to you when you're by yourself? Obviously, you can't communicate that. It's what comes out. It's what's emoted in the end. But what the fuck is it?
I wonder, there's a word I wonder a lot about. I was in a conversation recently with Sarah Haley and Nicole Fleetwood, two incredible writers. I think, and both poets, I think. I don't know if they would consider themselves poets, but the word that was coming up, and it was in relationship to like Black livingness, Black life, but was excess. And it's a word I think about when I think about my own poetry, the idea of excess. And so something I'm wondering, like, as you're saying, I'm sitting here thinking these thoughts, and it's me and it's energy. Is it language yet? I wonder, like, where actually does the image even happen in that? Does the image happen between whatever's here in my body and language? But I wonder if a way to think about language is that it is an excess, and a necessary excess so that I can become more than myself in order to connect to you.
A social attribute.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, I wonder. I mean, singing, like, did singing happen first with the singular, or like, I guess poetry is the same, right? Like, what does it feel like to sing to someone or to sing to the self? Or, like, what is a name if you're the only one calling your own name, right? Like the joy and beauty is in someone else's like mouth making your name happen,
But it's a translation. I mean, you have whatever the nature of the thoughts and the process of putting together ideas or language, whatever happens before the language exists, is a translation. And that translation seems to me an incredible mystery as of last night.
Well, you mentioned parrots, right? You mentioned parrot, and even them saying parrot. I have 2 African gray parrots. So I was saying in the chat, my partner had to take them out because they were being a little bit like, they're misbehaving a bit. So they're being noisy. But I'm always just struck by what they decide to say, like what they choose from the air. And the crazy thing is, like, okay, I know what they say. I hear it. They do funny things, like they make a knocking sound. So we go to the door. We open the door. There's nobody there. We realize it was the birds. But as soon as we open the door, they say, like, good boy, or go on. Like they get a kick out of it, But then sometimes we're around the house and I'll hear them and they're replicating an entire conversation.
Yeah.
So like, even thinking about that, like, that whatever their life energy is also taking the form of language.
African Grays, I had one as well. And I had to give it up when Lily was born. But I had it from a baby, and it took a long time to train it. But what it picked up, I mean, it's, again, what does it know about what it's saying, or is just mimicking? I mean, it would mimic water dropping in the tap. If you walked by it, it would say, "Oh, the women stroke me." It would stroke me, it would say. And I don't think it had any feelings behind that. It certainly wasn't going to be operative at that point.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting idea, that what a bird does, what it hears, what a dog knows. When you say, let's go to the park, I'm with the dog now, and you mention the word walk, and he goes crazy. So
Yeah.
what is that translation backwards, the other way?
Yeah, it's desire, right? Our birds, when they want a treat, they say hola, because that was like the first thing I taught them was hola. But they only say it when they want a treat. They don't say hello. So it's like food, hola. I should have just told them to say like comida, but but they don't say comida. They just say hola.
They're pragmatic.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's such a, and like, even that question, right, of like, what is language now? Like, what is a language? Like you and I had talked about earlier, and it's like, this is an important question always for me, is like, what is the language you need to live right now? Like, I think something that I'm really struck by is that across this time, I mean, I have students, so this makes it a little bit different, but across this time, because I haven't been traveling, I say a lot of the same names. And it's like, what does that mean of the names we're saying now, for example, in that I can count on one hand the number of names I say repeatedly that they're all names of people I love, versus if I'm off in a day, like suddenly, all of the strangers whose names I've said, which I think also can mean love, right? Because there's some way that me not saying those is meaning a kind of loneliness. So, I mean, just so one thing that I'll turn back around and just ask you is, like, what is the language you found yourself drawn to? And that can be from like actual, I've said this word a lot, or I say this phrase a lot, or these are the words I'm thinking of right now. Like, we know, for example, in our society is like, what is abolition? Like, suddenly everyone's trying to figure that out, But I'm just wondering, like, what are the languages, or, that you find yourself like needing or making questions of?
It's a great question. Two things, and I know we're maybe running out of time, but I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance. I want to add a question about how knowing the Navajo language affected your writing in English, or how it affected your language in English or Spanish for that matter. Because I'm guessing that the Navajo language is very different than the differences between English and Spanish.
Yeah, Mojave.
Mojave, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, the JAV gets everybody.
So in answer to your question, I think it's a lot of things. There's so many words that have so many complicated meanings that before you say them, before you think them through. So the vocabulary has changed in that way. I mean, there's so much in our vocabulary that's different than it was 5 years ago. The other is I'm writing a memoir now, and I'm trying to remember, and in remembering, I'm trying to be honest. And I think there's a very different language. How can I say this without? I think there's a language of honesty that's different than the everyday protective social patina that you present to other people. And if you're writing it, you have to be honest. But of course, being honest doesn't mean that that's what actually happened. It's what you remember. And since many of the people who could have confirmed it are no longer alive, what you remember is the fact of it. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, truth, honesty, like those are crazy, right? I mean, crazy constructions. It's the construction that feels so impossible versus the way we experience them, I think. I think a lot about memory, because we think a lot about dreams. Like dreams are a really important part of just how we go through a day. So it's like, if you meet, like if I'm talking with my elders, the first thing we talk about is like dreams. Like we don't say like, hey, did you sleep all right? We say like, how did you dream? And I mean, I think that's been like a crazy time for people during this pandemic time, is like, what do our dreams mean? I have friends who are like, I didn't dream anything, and I normally do. Or people who've had very, vivid dreams. But, what does that even mean in relationship to memory? Or like you're saying, truth. And like, I'm so interested in and just now putting that lens on that says memoir, suddenly what does that mean of what has happened? You know, even when you're aiming for a kind of truth, I think. Yeah. And yet, I mean, I feel like we're all sifting through this time right now for something that means truth to us. You know, like what will we remember of this? I don't know.
Certainly remember, depending on your circumstance, but if you were alone, you have a very different relationship to yourself than you had a year ago. Not necessarily better or worse, but certainly different. I mean,
I've been thinking about furniture a lot.
why?
I think it has to do with like the aloneness. Well, I also think furniture is like a really great vehicle to think about capital. But like, so in your time alone, like what was your furniture situation? Like, where did you find yourself? And like, do you have a favorite chair? Like the book, like, I don't know, furniture, I think it says so much about our lives.
Well, certainly the chair that you spend 80% of your waking time. So certainly that chair is everything. Looking out the window, looking at the Brooklyn Bridge,
Windows.
Looking at the refrigerator, thinking, what's for dinner? You know, what am I going to cook? Certain objects, my stationary bike, which threatens me every day.
Did you have it before the pandemic? Did you have the stationary bike?
No, because I didn't go out, and I figured I need to do something. And a friend of mine said, get this recumbent bike and just do it for half an hour every day. And I've now, while I've gone nowhere, I've gone as far as I could have driven to California. I went like 3,000 miles on this bike.
Wow.
So,
I got a bike too. You're better than I got a bike too, and I've been on it once.
well, you probably walk a lot more than I do.
I'm not a bike rider though. That's just the thing. Like I just, we never had bikes. It was like my brother might have stole one. So we had one for a couple of days and someone stole it back, or like, I feel like at Christmas, like, the police department was always, or the like fire department would give like poor kids bikes. So we would get a bike and then someone would steal it, or we'd pop a tire and no one knew how to fix it, or buy a tube. So like bikes just were never a thing. I think they're beautiful, but I just, yeah. Do you, so when you're talking about this chair that you do 80% of your work in, like, has that relationship changed? Because I feel like I have never worked as hard as I'm like hours wise as I'm working now that I'm in this state of pandemic.
Well, what's your chair?
What is what?
Your chair.
I've never sat at a desk. I'm not a desk person, but since we've shifted into this, and like my partner and I need to like have different spaces, I'm suddenly like at a desk probably more than I've been in my life in the last year. Even like counting all of school, I was never even at school long enough to be in a desk. But yeah, like so much so that I've had to like adopt a stretching regimen. I mean, and I'm a former athlete. Like I've had to like say, okay, like your hip flexors are shortening. You need to start stretching these.
Well, we talked a little bit about basketball before. That's very impressive.
Yeah, it's quite in the wake. It's in the wake. It's in the past, but it has shaped a lot of me. Is there one kind of physicality? Before I know we're getting out time.
No, this is great.
Is there one like? So I always talk. Well, like when I talk with my students a lot, we talk about lexicon. So like I live in the desert, so I have a lexicon of light because of living here. But I also have a body lexicon because of basketball. But Daniel, are there other like lexicons that you bring? So are there like certain physicalities that have been present in your life or that you've engaged with that you feel like you pull to the page, or even as like thinking about books and editing? Are there certain other things that are not, of course, writing that shape you?
That's a good question. I mean, I was in gymnastics for a long time, and that stayed with me in many ways. Not physically, I might add, but in certain psychological ways, where you imagine you have muscle memory that you don't have. uh, but you remember doing certain things. And I think cooking is a big part of my lexicon. I think about it obsessively. I wish we were having dinner now, Natalie. Bridget, you could join us too, but
I would love to.
there's a lot more to say about. I really want to find out more about your sense of language.
Yeah, no, the same. And like there will be I'm glad it won't be the same side as this, but there will be other sides. And yeah, and I make a mean cocktail. I can't cook, but I'm good with wine and cocktails. So
I'm good with that.
we'll meet on another facet face of
Never
this.
too late not to learn how to cook. Anyway, you have to eat.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So I don't want to cut you guys off because this is great. We do have a couple of questions. We have a couple minutes left. Let me see. Gavin asked, do you speak your poems out as you write them, speak each draft? Do you feel the words are the same each time you read them at different times of the day or night? And that's for either of you.
Natalie, you answer that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't know how to read the last poem I wrote or I read, Colony. I mean, I'm still trying to figure it out. That's the second time I've read it out loud. I've read snippets to like my partner. But yeah, so like I think that's interesting that I do read them out loud. So like some of the words I know out loud, but now that it's its own poem, because it's really new. It's like less than a week old, but like I don't know. It's funny to not know how to read it and then like to realize like, oh, this is a body of energy, a poem, and I made it. You would think I know what to do with it, but I still have to get to know it. And I mean, Daniel, I'm wondering about you because like those longer poems, like how do you spend time in them and getting to know them?
No, but what you just said is interesting because it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of translation. Yeah, they're your poems. They came out of you. They're your lines. But once they hit the page, they have a different life.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out what that is because once they become public, they're no longer yours.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's like there's something about, I don't know, there's something about ink and font and page that I haven't quite figured out yet. That's like the interstitial body maybe that I don't trust.
All right. Let me see. This is a question for Natalie. There's a book where you and Ada Limon, I think I'm saying that correctly, wrote to and from each other, title and how to obtain. That question is from Alice.
Oh, it was just an exercise. Like it was just a friend thing that it's in the New Yorker. Yeah. Daniel, so they're asking, like, I did a kind of like a correspondence with a friend of mine, Ada Limon. And we were like writing to each other, but they were like in between a letter and a poem. And we didn't have a conversation about them. It was just the way we were communicating while we were like traveling. We were both on the road constantly. Do you have correspondences like that you've kept?
I think those are so great. I haven't read that, and I'd love to read it. So if you could send me a link or something so I can read it. I do that. I do it mostly with Robert Hass.
Oh, wow. I would love to hear what you both are talking about. That'd be incredible.
We've been working on a poem. We're both kind of lazy and then we forget. It's kind of like that poem of two rams getting ready to fight. And they back up, they're pawing their earth. They back up, and then they forget and they start to graze. It's a little bit like that. But we have a poem which has been 5 years in the making called Styles of Eating. And it's 4 seasons. You think it wouldn't be that difficult to finish. But those are fun because they're personal. They're across, yeah, right. As you said, they're a cross between letters and poems.
Yeah, that language, right? That special language that I don't think you'd find anyplace else. I'm glad though that your rams, you start grazing, because I recently saw 2 rams on the river on a cliff fighting, and one ended up in the water. So down the cliff and in the water. So I'm glad that you're still only grazing.
My 2 are happy. You can eat the grass.
So I have one more question for you both tonight. This question comes from one of my coworkers, Chloe. She's a bookseller at Book Review, and she is an amazing poet herself. Her question for the two of you is, do you have any advice on how to deal with imposter syndrome?
Of what?
Imposter syndrome.
I'm not even sure what that is. Besides life.
It kind of refers to not really believing in yourself and your own abilities. Like I said, she's also a poet. I think it has to do with, like, I think her question is really, how do you build your self-confidence in your work and your ability?
Natalie, I'm going to let you respond to that.
I think friends. I mean, honestly, poetry is friends. And I know, right? We have to publish, we have to eat. And like, I never thought I would be like, I teach poetry. So I'm in a certain position, right? To be able to say, like, I make my living because of poetry, which is lucky. It was unexpected. But honestly, like, Twitter will make you feel like you're nothing. Like, Twitter is like the biggest, like, I don't know if you've ever been to a bullfight. I know I'm not supposed to like them, but I have half my family is from Spain and the other half's from Mexico. But I know bullfighting, and like, it reminds me of that, like, it's such a manipulation. So like, I think the hardest part for writers is like that you really have to understand that Twitter is like a facade that you can push over. And then, I mean, for me, like, and I have a certain position, but I don't know, poetry happens for me with my friends, like, that's like, to sit and read, like, I mean, this is kind of crazy, right? Like, I mean, like, Daniel, I didn't know you before. Roger knows you. Roger built this thing with half friends, half strangers. And now suddenly, like, I feel like, Roger, now you're in my constellation. And yeah, and I mean, I guess, like, the imposter part is like, it is actually like fake, like, it makes us feel fake, like we don't belong, but that's really the last place poetry even happens. So, that's not like a real answer. And again, like I say, I've been really, really lucky, but I don't know. I'll just say this, like, I've been on a lot of basketball courts where I got my ass beat, where, like, I didn't have the game to hang with what was happening on the court. And I love basketball, and I still played. And sometimes I was really good, and sometimes I just couldn't hang. And yet it has been the thing that has had the biggest impact on my life, So I don't know, Chloe, I just say, like, don't listen to Twitter.
I would say that if you do not feel like an imposter at times in your life, or maybe all the time in your life, you can't improve as a poet or as a person or as anything else. I mean, there's always that doubt about, like, you've done well, but did you deserve it? Is it yours, really? And the bullfighting image really interests me, because I want to ask, is it the sword or the cape that you're thinking about when you make that statement?
It's the cape that has the sword in it. I think that is, it's that one. Yeah, that one's like, oh, this is, you're like, wait,
answer.
I thought they were playing, and then something. But I mean, I don't know, Chloe, what Daniel just said earlier, I mean, like, even that could be similar to what you're thinking of with that poetry, with that imposter syndrome, is like, what does language mean? Like, where does it happen? And I don't know how you feel, Daniel, but that's been a really hard thing during this time. So, like, my reservation got hit really bad by COVID, and then my family went through it. And, like, yes, I can make a living off poetry, and that's super helpful because I take care of my family. But in the long run, I'm like, I had to learn how to, like, do debridement on a wound my mother had. And I was like, I am useless. Like, these little soft hands that can, like, hit a jump shot and, like, know what kind of pin they love. Like, I was really useless when it came to learning how to take care of my mother's body. So I think there's that too, is like, like, understanding that sometimes what we do is so small, but if it makes a tiny connection, which I think poetry does, I don't know. Yeah, because I think sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, wow, this world needs some major work, and all I have is a poem, you know? So it's yeah, no, Chloe, that's a great, yeah, I agree with Daniel. I should have stopped ahead. Like, we all feel it, and we must maybe, you know?
I think those are great answers. We are all over, so I am going to have to say goodnight to both of you. Thank you both so much for participating in Write America, and to everyone who tuned in tonight, and of course to Roger Rosenblatt for making this series happen.
Cheers.
Thank you, Roger.
Cheers, Daniel.
I can't believe you're drinking white wine.
I'll cheers my water bottle.
It's like 90 degrees here already. So this is what we call this is connection, right? From my kava out to your red wine in the cold part.
This has been really great, Natalie. I've really enjoyed spending this show with you. I hope you can do it again.
Yeah, I know we will.
A poem is better than a penny.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and pennies are like going out of style now, right? You can't find a penny anymore.
Oh.
I just want to say thank you again to you both. And next Monday at 7 p.m., we are going to have Paul Auster, Siri Husfit, and David Remnick. So we will see you back here next Monday at 7 p.m.
All right. Dream well, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Gracias mil. Gracias mil. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.